Kia ora, hello, haere mai, and welcome. Now, last week on Anti-Flatter Takedowns, we seen Morgile completely fuck up parallel lines. Now, this week, he's going to try and take on Polaris and the constellations. He also tries to use some pretty big words. So, let's see how he fares, shall we?
As a lifelong globe earther, I was often confounded by several problems with the standard theory of gravity, astronomy, and infinite space.
Given what we've heard from you already, I'm not surprised.
One of the biggest problems that I never could seem to rectify was that of Polaris's centrality to all the other stars. In truth, the only reason we have any sort of foundation for the concept of geological axial rotation, as well as distant stars housed in an infinite space, is due to the rotation of stars around Polaris.
That's just not true. See, one of the ways that we know of the Earth's rotation is a device known as the Fulcomb's pendulum that was first used in 1851.
Don't forget that Ringlea's gyro.
Of course not, Director Jean. But let's leave that explanation up to Bob, shall we?
The alleged alignment between Polaris and our alleged axis of rotation is claimed to be a chance coincidence, and according to theory, over time we will eventually have a new North Pole star.
No, it isn't just some coincidence. It's the way how our galaxy works. You are right in saying, though, that the North Star will change over time. See, in 3000 BCE, it was Alpha Draconis, and in 13,000 years, it's going to be Vega.
This is, of course, owing to the alleged hypothetical alignment between our axis of rotation and the distant star, some 325 light years away, and the phenomenon of axial precession. Now, we're told that the sheer distance to the stars prevents any noticeable parallax change in the apparent position of the stars.
Well, given the fact that the effects of parallax get smaller the more distant an object is, what you just said is perfect proof that the stars are far away and not local.
In other words, since we are supposedly traveling through space with the Sun at nearly 500,000 miles an hour, as are all the other stars, allegedly in a similar motion, you would expect to see changes in the position of stars relative to one another.
If all the stars are moving with relative motion to each other, then why would we expect to see sudden changes in their relative positions?
Since some stars are allegedly much closer than others, the nearest star being about 4.2 light years, the furthest visible with the naked eye star allegedly some 16,000 light years, according to the standard theory. So with this in mind, you would expect to see major changes, albeit over long periods of time, in the relative position of the stars, since again we're supposedly moving through space and many of the stars are relatively close, and many of the visible stars are allegedly many times further. So as we allegedly move through space, the stars nearest to us should change position more quickly through space compared to the stars that are much further away. Such stellar parallax would amount to major permanent changes in the relative positions of stars. Thus, we would not be able to map out constellations that would work for navigational purposes for thousands of years.
Right, and the stars do move. Remember, you said this would happen over a long period of time. And you're right. See, the great astronomer Edmund Halley noticed that the star charts from the ancient Greeks that were over 1600 years old at the time were no longer accurate. Some of the stars had shifted, albeit, of course, ever so slightly, but it was enough for Halley to realise that the stars moved. Thus, we needed to update our star charts.
The simple fact is, the constellation system, which appears to have been first mapped by the ancient Greeks during at least the 1st century BC, hasn't changed one bit over the 2,000 plus years since it was created.
But you see, the constellations have changed. Now, Space.com has a really good explanation on the changes we have seen and will see with the constellation Orion. I highly recommend you go check it out. The link's going to be in the description.
While the sheer size and distance to the stars may seem to be adequate to explain the lack of major stellar parallax over time, this argument becomes less and less feasible with each passing decade.
And there is half your problem. Stop thinking in terms of decades and start thinking in terms of centuries.
Over thousands of years, there certainly should be permanent changes in the constellations, since the stars comprising the constellations are not claimed to be related to one another whatsoever, other than the fact that they appear in proximity to one another from our arbitrary vantage point.
Just rewatch my previous comments if you're just going to repeat yourself.
So, in a single constellation, you might have one star that's supposedly 20 light years away, and another star in the same constellation that may be purported as 200 light years away. And you may have yet another star in the same constellation that is 2,000 light years away. In this sort of layout, you would never expect to see permanent proximity of these stars, since, again, we're allegedly traveling through space with the sun, and the stars visible in the sky are supposedly flying through space at similar ludicrous speeds as well. The last thing you would expect to see are permanent clusters of stars which never change relative positions to one another.
And this is why we do see constellations change. Also, FYI, it took one quick Google search to confirm this.
Now, aside from this major problem with the standard theory of space, we have an even bigger problem when it comes to Polaris, the North Pole star itself.
Now, given y'all gone and fucked this whole thing up so far, y'all issue with Polaris gonna be fun.
This is due to the fact that Polaris is unique in the respect that all the other stars make daily circuits around it. It's claimed that this phenomenon is directly resultant from Polaris's near-perfect alignment to our alleged axis of rotation. Of course, if you consider the ball-Earth model, if you're facing north and observing Polaris at sunset, you'd be facing in the opposite direction towards space 12 hours later when observing Polaris just before sunrise. These two angles give us a triangle, with the equator or respective latitude line being the base of the triangle. If you map this observable data into 3D AutoCAD software, which is extremely accurate, it shows that Polaris is only a few 100,000 miles above the Earth according to such triangulation data. This simply will not do when it comes to the ball-Earth theory, as Polaris is alleged to be quadrillions of miles away, not mere hundreds of thousands.
And herein lies another problem. So using parallax alone, which even you claim yourself as being unreliable, has produced conflicting results. Luckily, we have another method. Isn't that right, Corporal Flatter? That's right. See, the European Space Agency has a satellite mission called Gaia, which, amongst other things, records the light and relative change of positions of these stars. Now, the problem is, Polaris, that's a tad too bright.
Except the Polaris that you see is not one star, but rather union of three, the furthest of which is dim enough to measure. Which means we can accurately measure the distance to Polaris at 447 light years without the need of your AutoCAD or parallax alone.
As Polaris is proven by simple triangulation to be much closer than purported by theoretical astrophysics, even assuming a ball Earth, this is a huge problem for the standard theory. Furthermore, since the Earth is allegedly in motion, as is the Sun, you'd certainly not expect to see Polaris as central to all the other stars over the course of thousands of years. Again, this is because when you're facing towards Polaris, say at sunset, you have one leg of a triangle, and 12 hours later at sunrise, or just before sunrise, you'd be facing in sort of the opposite direction towards space, creating another leg of the triangle, and of course the equator, or whichever latitude line applies, would be the base of that triangle. So if you move the Earth millions of miles as claimed by the globe Earth theory, it doesn't seem feasible that you would have this perfect triangulation on Polaris, which has never even budged a smidgen over thousands of years.
Except it has. And if Morgile actually put down his pipe for 30 seconds and researched it properly, he would know this also.
But this is truly only the beginning of the problems with Polaris and the ball Earth theory. The Earth allegedly undergoes a 26,000-year wobble cycle. This means that the Earth's axis of rotation would necessarily be in constant flux, and certainly couldn't point towards Polaris for thousands of years.
He says this while showing picture of precession.
This alleged wobble in the Earth's axis demands that we absolutely cannot have a stable or permanent North Star in perpetual alignment with our hypothetical axis of rotation. If the Earth's axis is wobbling through space along a long-term precession circle, the most obvious evidence for such axial precession would necessarily be found in whichever star is aligned to the axis. So if Polaris is aligned to our axis right now, in 20 or 40 years from now, we should see a measurable, permanent change in the centrality of Polaris.
Well, given that the angular shift of Polaris is only 0.000042 degrees per year, the angular shift in 40 years would be 0.000168 degrees. Not a big fucking change, is it?
As the alignment we have right now simply will be misaligned after a few decades of precession. The Earth's axis is claimed to be phasing through a 26,000-year wobble or precession cycle, which demands that our axis should never be aligned to a single star or a single point in space for longer than a couple of decades at the most.
Y'all do know how long 26,000 years is, right? If we took the Roman Empire starting from Augustus Caesar all the way through to the collapse of the Western Empire, that's a time of around 503 years. Meaning, we could fit approximately 51.6 Roman empires into that time. And y'all expect to see a change in just a couple of decades?
If the Earth is wobbling once every 26,000 years, as they claim, then we should see a single-degree change in the alignment of our axis over 72 years, or a quarter of a degree in just 18 years.
Yes, and 1 degree is bloody tiny. Let's say you take a pencil and look at it for an entire year, and in that year, change its position by 1 degree. See if you notice it.
In truth, we have never seen any change in this alleged alignment between our axis and Polaris, meaning the ball Earth theory yet again fails to match observable reality.
And as we have shown, Morgile has fucked this whole thing up again, and he's wrong on all accounts. Anyone else not surprised at all? Now, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. We are about halfway through this video from Morgile, so a part 3 is a definite. But anyway, thank you so much for watching and making it to the end. If you like this video, please give it that thumbs up. If you haven't already, we would really appreciate that subscription. Until next time, ka kite.
Another.
Ah, the smell of beans and applesauce. I hate to say I told you so, but the Icewall project was put to bed for a reason. Besides, I much preferred debunking.
Auntie, you always wear such nice costumes.
Tushy, so, I hear you have a flat problem.
You should talk.
And you should listen. We're putting together a team.
Who's we?